Amira Johnson was no stranger to the hustle. As a marketing executive in a fast-paced city, every day felt like a race against time. She had spent years climbing up the corporate ladder, always putting in extra hours, always striving for the next goal. Today was supposed to be different, though. Today, she was finally going to treat herself to something she rarely allowed: luxury. After booking a first-class ticket for her business trip to Los Angeles, she was looking forward to the space, the quiet, the comfort that came with it. It wasn't just about the extra legroom or the gourmet meals, though. It was a reward, a symbol of everything she had worked for. She had earned it. As Amira walked through the busy airport terminal, she smiled to herself, thinking about the relaxing hours ahead in the sky. Her heels clicked against the floor, and her sleek black suitcase rolled effortlessly behind her. She wasn't just going to any meeting. She was going to meet high-profile clients, and she needed to be sharp. When she reached the gate, she saw the familiar crowd of people standing around, waiting to board. Nothing unusual. She was early, and that meant she'd get to settle in before the others arrived. With her first-class ticket in hand, she walked confidently to the front of the line, showing it to the gate agent. The agent, a young woman with a stern expression, barely glanced at Amira before turning back to her computer screen. "First class?" the agent asked flatly, her voice dripping with doubt. Amira nodded, offering a polite smile. "Yes, I'm in first class." The agent raised an eyebrow and then scanned her ticket again, still looking uncertain. I think there's been some mistake. Your seat might be in coach." Amira's smile faded slightly. "No, my ticket clearly shows first class," she replied, trying to stay calm. The agent stared at the screen for a moment longer, then handed the ticket back to Amira, her face unchanging. "I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to check with my supervisor. Please step aside." Amira was taken aback but nodded. She wasn't the type to cause a scene, so she took a step back, her mind racing. Why was this happening? She could hear the whispers of nearby passengers as they looked at her, some more openly than others. The agent didn't make any move to help or explain, and Amira found herself standing there, feeling small and confused. The agent returned after what felt like an eternity. "Please follow me," she said, her tone even colder than before. Without saying a word, Amira followed her through the crowded gate area, feeling the eyes of the passengers on her back. Her heart began to race. What was going on? Why was she being treated like this? When they reached the corner of the terminal, Amira was met by a man in a suit, her supervisor. His smile was tight, unwelcoming. "Ma'am, we've checked your ticket again," he said, as though this were all just some kind of misunderstanding. "But we're afraid there's no first-class seat available for you today." Amira was stunned. "What do you mean?" "I paid for that seat. It's right here." She held up her ticket, but the supervisor didn't even look at it. "We're going to have to find you a seat in coach," he said, his voice filled with a sense of finality. The air between them was thick with tension. Amira's grip on her ticket tightened as she fought to keep her emotions in check. What was going on here? Something didn't add up. The supervisor's words hit Amira like a cold wave. "We're going to have to find you a seat in coach," he repeated, his tone flat. Amira felt a knot form in her stomach. She looked at the supervisor, then at the gate agent, and then around at the people watching them. A few passengers had turned their attention to her, their eyes darting back and forth between Amira and the airline staff. "I don't understand," Amira said, trying to stay calm, but her voice shaking slightly. "My ticket clearly shows first class. I paid for first class." She took a deep breath, trying to hold on to her composure. "Why am I being treated like this?" The supervisor didn't seem fazed. "There must be a mistake in the system," he said, looking at her as if she were the one who had done something wrong. "We're just trying to sort it out." But nothing felt right. Amira felt the uncomfortable sting of being singled out. She had flown first class before, and she had never been treated like this. She wasn't sure if it was her confidence or her blackness that made her stand out in the eyes of these people. But in that moment, it felt like both were working against her. "I'm sorry, but we can't accommodate you in first class today," the supervisor added, his eyes avoiding hers. "You'll have to board coach. We'll reissue a seat there." Amira felt the anger rise in her chest, but she pushed it down. She wasn't going to lose control. Not now. Not here. "This isn't right," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I've been waiting for this flight. I paid for this seat. This is not how this is supposed to go." She didn't know exactly where the words were coming from, but she felt a sudden surge of determination. The supervisor didn't budge. Instead, he glanced at the gate agent, who gave a small nod. They both looked at Amira as if she was the problem. She could feel her heart racing. Was this really happening? She refused to back down. "I want to speak with your manager," Amira said, standing taller and more assertive now. "And I want this fixed." The supervisor paused, his face hardening. Amira could see he didn't expect a fight. He seemed to think she would just accept whatever they were telling her, quietly and without complaint. But Amira wasn't going to just let it slide. This was a principal matter. It wasn't about the seat. It was about the way she was being treated. "I'll call the manager," he said reluctantly, as if he'd been forced to concede, but his voice held no empathy. "But it's not going to change anything." As he turned to make the call, Amira's frustration grew. The seconds stretched into what felt like minutes, and the room seemed to grow colder with each passing moment. People around her whispered, casting glances, and some even shook their heads as if they already knew the outcome. But Amira didn't care about the whispers. All that mattered was the truth, and she wasn't going to let it go. She pulled out her phone and started recording. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about everyone who had ever been made to feel small or unworthy in a situation where they should have been treated with respect. Amira stood there, phone in hand, watching as the supervisor dialed the manager. She could feel her heart pounding, but she forced herself to stay calm. The longer she stood there, the more she could sense the eyes of the other passengers on her. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed for her, while others openly stared, their expressions ranging from confusion to judgment. It felt as though the weight of their gaze was pushing down on her, but Amira wasn't going to let that stop her. She kept her phone recording, capturing every moment. This wasn't just about getting her seat. It was about showing everyone that this kind of treatment was not acceptable, no matter who you were. The supervisor spoke quietly into his phone, and after a few moments, he hung up and turned to face her. His expression hadn't softened. "The manager will be here shortly," he said, his voice stiff. "But like I said, I'm afraid there's nothing we can do. The system shows no first-class seat available for you." Amira didn't know what he was talking about. She had checked her ticket multiple times. Everything was in order. She had no doubt that she belonged in first class. Her frustration was now building, but she pushed it down again. This wasn't just about getting angry. It was about holding them accountable. "If there's no seat for me," Amira said slowly, looking him straight in the eye, "then why am I still being asked to leave first class? Why am I being treated like I don't belong?" She could feel the heat rising in her chest, but she was determined to make them see her point. This isn't about the seat anymore. This is about how I'm being treated. The supervisor shifted uncomfortably, but didn't answer. Amira could feel his discomfort. He didn't expect someone like her to stand up so boldly. Just then, the manager arrived, a middle-aged man wearing a neatly pressed suit and a name tag that read Jackson. He stepped up to the group, looking between the supervisor and Amira with a practiced smile. But Amira wasn't fooled by the smile. It felt fake, like it had been rehearsed. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for the inconvenience," he began, his voice smooth and calm, as if he were reading from a script. "I understand this must be frustrating for you, but we are doing everything we can to resolve the issue." Amira didn't buy it. "I don't need apologies," she said sharply. "I need you to do what's right. You're telling me you don't have a seat for me, but I paid for that seat. I deserve to be treated with respect." The manager's smile faltered for a second, but he quickly recovered. "We'll get this sorted out," he assured her. "Let's move you to a coach seat for now, and we'll look into the issue." "No," Amira said firmly, cutting him off. "I'm not moving. Not until this is fixed. I've already paid for my first-class seat, and I'm not leaving until it's made right." The room fell quiet for a moment. Amira could feel the tension rising. She wasn't sure what the next step would be, but she knew she couldn't back down now. Not after everything she'd been through today. The manager, Jackson, stared at Amira for a moment, his face flickering with irritation. It was clear he hadn't expected her to stand her ground like this. Most people, Amira stood in the corner of the terminal, her back straight and her eyes fixed on the airline staff. The minutes seemed to stretch endlessly as she waited for them to return with some sort of resolution. The usual buzz of the airport around her felt distant, muffled by the tension she was holding onto. She had learned long ago that silence could be powerful, and right now, silence was her weapon. She could hear the quiet murmurs of passengers nearby, some offering sympathetic glances while others whispered to each other. She noticed a few who seemed to avoid looking at her, uncomfortable with the situation. Amira didn't care. The whispers weren't for her. They were for the people who saw what was happening and knew it wasn't right. Her mind raced with questions. Why was this happening to her? Why did it feel like they were trying to push her down just because she didn't fit their idea of who should be in first class? It wasn't just about the seat. It was about how she was being treated, as if she didn't belong there, as if she wasn't worthy of the luxury she had earned. Just as she was about to lose herself in the thoughts, Jackson, the manager, returned. He was flanked by the supervisor and a second staff member who was holding a small clipboard. Amira noticed the way they all looked at her, uneasy, like they weren't sure how to approach the situation. It was a subtle shift, but it was there. They were no longer as confident as they had been before. "Ma'am, we've reviewed the situation," Jackson began, his voice more cautious this time, less rehearsed. "It appears there was an issue with the booking system, but we've made arrangements for you to sit in first class." He paused, as if waiting for her to react. "We'll escort you to your seat now." Amira didn't move. She wasn't ready to let them off the hook that easily. "And what about an apology?" she asked, her voice steady. "I was treated like I didn't belong here, like I was some kind of mistake." The staff exchanged looks again. The silence between them felt heavier now. Finally, Jackson spoke, his expression softening. "Ma'am, we are truly sorry for the confusion. This was an unfortunate situation, and we'll make sure it doesn't happen again." Amira didn't respond right away. She wasn't sure what she wanted to hear anymore. The apology felt empty, a forced gesture just to calm her down. She didn't need their pity. She needed them to understand the weight of what had happened. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern of disrespect, and it couldn't be brushed off so easily. "I appreciate the apology," she said slowly, her voice steady. "But this needs to be more than just words. This kind of thing can't happen to anyone else." The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Amira felt a sense of power. The situation had shifted. They had come to her, offering her the seat she had paid for, yes. But they were also starting to understand that there was more at stake here. It wasn't just a seat on a plane. It was about dignity, respect, equality. Jackson nodded, but Amira could see the hesitation in his eyes. "We'll work to improve our training," he said, "and ensure that something like this doesn't happen again." Amira's phone was still recording. She wasn't going to let this be a one-time thing. She would make sure her voice, and the voices of others who had been treated this way, were heard. "That's a start," she said quietly, then turned to walk toward the gate. Her steps were steady now, each one filled with the quiet confidence of a woman who had just taken control of a situation that had tried to make her feel small. But Amira was far from small, and she wouldn't let them forget that. Amira walked towards the gate, her heart still racing, but now with a sense of accomplishment. She wasn't sure how things had shifted so quickly, but they had. Jackson and the other airline staff were behind her, following quietly as if giving her space. The other passengers had started boarding by now, but she felt like the eyes of the room were still on her, watching her every move. As she approached the jet bridge, the flight attendant standing at the entrance gave her a nod. Amira didn't say a word. She simply handed her boarding pass to the woman, who scanned it with a neutral expression. The attendant didn't seem to recognize the tension that had built up around Amira, but then again, she probably didn't know the whole story. The staff led Amira to her seat in first class, and for a brief moment, she almost allowed herself to relax. The large leather seat, the soft lighting, the extra space. It was everything she had been looking forward to. But even in that moment of comfort, something didn't sit right. She could still feel the sting of what had happened. This wasn't just a mix-up. This was something deeper. She sat down in her seat, adjusting her bag on the floor and placing her phone on the armrest. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She'd been recording the entire time, capturing the moment they had tried to force her into coach, capturing the uncomfortable way they had dismissed her. The weight of the moment hit her again as she thought about how she could use this, how she could turn this from a personal frustration into something bigger. Just as she was about to tap on her phone, the flight attendant returned. She smiled at Amira, her tone pleasant. "Would you like some water while you settle in, Miss Johnson?" Amira nodded, forcing a smile, but her mind was still spinning. The apology, the reassurances, it all felt like damage control. They had given her the seat she paid for, but there was still something missing. Something more. They hadn't fixed the core issue. How had they treated her in the first place? How had they assumed she didn't belong? She could feel the heat rise in her chest again. She couldn't let this slide. Not now. Not ever. As the plane began to fill with passengers, Amira quietly started typing out a post on her social media. She didn't want to do this, but she knew it was the only way to ensure something like this wouldn't happen again. She began by telling her side of the story, recounting how she had been treated and how they had tried to push her out of first class. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She didn't leave out any details. She wasn't going to let the airline brush it under the rug. She added the video footage from her phone to the post, hoping it would speak for itself. She could already feel her fingers itching, knowing the power of what she was doing. This wasn't just her story anymore. It was the story of anyone who had been overlooked or treated unfairly. When she hit post, she sat back in her seat, her mind still racing. She had no idea what the fallout would be, but she knew this was just the beginning. This wouldn't be swept away so easily. It was out there now, and with it, she had made a stand, not just for herself, but for others who had been made to feel like they didn't belong. The plane was still boarding when Amira's phone buzzed. At first, she thought it was just another notification, another message she didn't need to deal with. But when she glanced at the screen, she saw dozens of new notifications flooding in. Her heart skipped a beat. People were already responding to the post she had made just moments earlier. The comments were a mix of shock, anger, and support. People were angry on her behalf. Some shared their own stories of being treated unfairly or overlooked, while others expressed disbelief that something like this could happen in 2025. Amira couldn't help but smile as she scrolled through the comments. She had expected some backlash, but the support was overwhelming. One comment stood out to her. It was from a woman named Clara, who had written, "This is exactly why we need to keep speaking up. I'm proud of you for standing your ground." Amira's chest tightened, the weight of the words sinking in. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the people who had faced similar situations and felt powerless to speak out. Amira had given them a voice. A notification popped up. Her post had been shared, and then shared again. She could feel her stomach flip. Her story was gaining traction, and with it, she realized the magnitude of what she had done. This wasn't just a social media rant. It was a call to action. The flight attendant returned with her water, smiling politely. Amira took the glass from her hand, but barely registered it. Her mind was still focused on the storm brewing online. She knew there would be people questioning her, criticizing her actions, but at that moment she didn't care. The truth was out there, and that was all that mattered. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Amira couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. It was as if she had crossed some invisible line, a line she had been hesitant to cross before. She had stood up for herself, not in anger, but in quiet determination. And now, her voice was echoing far beyond the confines of the plane. She leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes for a moment. The hum of the engines, the soft chatter of other passengers, and the clinking of trays and cups filled her ears. But it was all distant now. She had already fought the fight that mattered. The plane lifted off the ground, and with it, Amira felt something shift inside of her. It was like the weight of years of being underestimated, of being overlooked, had finally been lifted. Her phone buzzed again. A message from her sister. "I'm so proud of you, girl. You just sparked something big." Amira couldn't help but laugh softly. It was like the universe was confirming what she already knew. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. As the plane soared higher into the sky, Amira looked out the window, feeling a quiet sense of triumph. She had done more than just fight for her seat in first class. She had fought for something bigger, something that couldn't be ignored. And no matter where her journey took her next, she knew she would never back down again. As the plane climbed higher into the sky, Amira's phone buzzed again, this time with a direct message. She opened it, her eyes scanning the words quickly. "You've gone viral. This is everywhere." Her heart skipped a beat. She refreshed her social media feed and saw the flood of comments, shares, and news outlets picking up the story. She had known it would get attention, but this was bigger than she had expected. People from all over were tagging the airline, calling for an explanation. The video she had posted was everywhere. The airline's official social media account had already responded, offering a public apology, stating they were looking into the incident. Amira couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just her speaking out anymore. It was everyone who had ever felt mistreated, everyone who had been ignored. The comments were still pouring in, many of them from strangers who shared their own experiences of being treated unfairly. One person wrote, "This happens all the time. Thank you for showing us that it's okay to stand up." Another wrote, "I've been there, but I never spoke up. I'm inspired by you." Reading those words made Amira feel like she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for all of them. Amidst the supportive comments, there were also some harsh ones. People questioning her, calling her a troublemaker or an attention seeker. Amira knew she would face criticism. It came with the territory. But those comments didn't bother her. The support from so many others was louder, more powerful. It was clear that she had struck a nerve. By the time the plane had reached cruising altitude, Amira's post had been shared thousands of times. Major news sites were starting to report on the incident, many focusing on the racial undertones of the situation. Amira knew the conversation was shifting. This wasn't just about her being denied a seat in first class. It was about something much larger, the systemic bias that people faced every day, the kind of bias that had been invisible to so many until now. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Jackson, the manager at the airline. "I'm truly sorry for what happened. We've already begun internal reviews and are addressing this with all involved." Amira stared at the message for a moment. Part of her wanted to respond, to say something sharp, but she held back. This wasn't about getting an apology anymore. It was about making sure this never happened again to anyone else. As the plane flew smoothly through the air, Amira sat back, still holding her phone in her hands. She thought about how many times in her life she had been told to be quiet, to not make waves, to let things slide. She thought about the moments when she had stayed silent, when she had accepted the unfair treatment without question. But not anymore. Today had changed everything. The rest of the flight passed in a blur, but Amira was no longer focused on the destination. She was focused on the journey ahead, the one that had just begun. She had made her voice heard, and it had echoed far beyond what she had imagined. And as the plane descended toward its destination, Amira knew this was just the first step in a bigger fight. She wouldn't stop until she saw real change.